What is up, guys? Today I am continuing on with the Everything I Learned From ... series. If you didn't watch the first one, I have a little bit of a video. We'll link up here somewhere. We can see kind of what is the point of this series. And so today I'm going to talk about everything I learned from Charles Poliquin. So a couple things that I want to cover on this. Again, the brief overview, the whole point of these videos is somewhat to, people want to know kind of my background, my education, where did I learn things from, who are some of my mentors. So some of it is absolutely to pay it forward, to help give you guys a little bit of understanding where my thought process came from. Obviously give credit where credit's due for a lot of things that, again, I learned from other people or sparked things from other people. And then obviously, hopefully, you guys can benefit from it. So I know a lot of coaches watch this channel, trainers watch this channel. So some things that hopefully foster just like a good growth mindset, see some of the things that were big kind of turning points in my career. And then obviously there's some carryover for everyone, right? So if you just want to know a little bit more about training or how to get better or whatever it is, some of it's hopefully just more about, instead of all just the nuts and bolts and specifics of everything I learned from him, a little bit more of just some kind of bigger concepts and stuff. So a couple things, I'm going to give a little disclaimer on this as well too. If you don't know, Charles Poliquin passed away the last couple of years ago, which is obviously, not very, very depressing. So I don't want to make it this is more of a tribute. Obviously, I want to do a lot of things positive in his memory. And so I'm just going to ask that, again, I feel like it's weird that I have to say this, but it's YouTube these days, that all the comments are respectful and all that kind of stuff as well too. Because if not, I'm going to block you. So anyway, I really like to say that kind of stuff, but I just want everyone to be very respectful, obviously, of him and his memory and his families that are still here. But moving on to the good stuff and the positive stuff, I'm going to start with first, for anyone that doesn't know who Charles Poliquin is, I suggest you just do a little Google. You'll find out. Again, you guys have heard me say for myself, I don't like to use the term best in relating to a coach or a trainer. But I'll say it with him that I would make a strong argument for he's the best strength coach of all time. Just sheerly on paper, by who he's worked with from an athlete standpoint, from Olympic medaling athletes to professional athletes, whatever. Again, I'm just saying that because in my eyes, he's the best strength coach basically ever to live. And so look him up. I always say he's probably one of the smartest human beings in the way that his brain operated, as well as actually, in the trenches producing crazy results with everybody that he worked with. So, it's worth doing a little Google, do a little more research than I can just tell you in these 30 seconds, not taking up the whole video. But so to give a little context of where I was, how I got introduced to him, what led me to do some education with him, I was working for kind of a big box training company. They don't exist anymore. They got bought. But very similar to like a Lifetime Fitness. I'm going to use that as an example because I think Lifetime's pretty international, but very similar to a Lifetime Fitness. It was a very, very good, very important part of my career. I'd really been focusing a whole lot on kind of the business development aspect of training. I'd gotten really good at that to the point where I was managing a club successfully for a couple years, had one of the best clubs in the company. And I was really just kind of getting to a point where I felt like I was pretty darn good with the business side, very comfortable with how to do things, not only with my own business, but develop trainers, develop a well-running club that obviously could hit goals and plans and produce great results for their clients. And so I was really starting to get into more education at that point in time, kind of get back to more nuts and bolts stuff. Because again, I was always more, obviously had some nerd focus for myself when I was going through high school, college, really obviously always interested in everything about training. And then I had a couple of years of so focused on business that I kind of got away from any nerd stuff. Business, customer service, there's so much to that in personal training. And so when I started there was one of my mentors in that company. He was actually, I don't know if he was the president of the personal training or president of the company at that point in time. He was once the president of personal training, moved to be president of the company. And I learned so much from him. In my eyes, he's just a brilliant, brilliant guy. And I remember I always used to just pick his brain. Like whenever I'd be around the club, I'd hit him up. I'd literally call him. I'd ask him questions all the time because he would, in my eyes, was the smartest guy in the company. And so I remember at one point in time, him nicely being like, man, like I've got a busy day, man. I've got a busy job. I can't constantly just be answering all your questions. I can't be your only source of like education or whatever. And I was just like, man, like I want to get better. Like, isn't that kind of your job? You're kind of my boss. And he just said, man, you're going to have to go and like get some like outside education, like that exists. And it's so funny. It's like you just get like these, you get the blinders on. And it honestly was like a, light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, oh yeah, that exists, like continuing education. And so I asked him, I said, do you have any recommendations, whatever? He was one of the first people to tell me, good education isn't something you can just take in an online course, just take a test for and pass. Good education is something, as far as personal training world, that you really have to do in person, because obviously there's a big human component there. There's a big you're interacting with other bodies component there. And if there's not some hands-on there, I don't know how you really develop a skill set again without meeting in person. So he's like, you're going to have to travel. And he said, and all the good education probably isn't going to be coming to where I'm at in Florida. Very rarely have I had any good education come anywhere in Florida. And so he personally knew Charles Poliquin and said, check out some of his stuff. He does a ton of stuff. And so I remember looking around and trying to figure out which one of his courses I wanted to take first. And I believe the very first one I had to go to Toronto for. And I believe that was like his strength coach. He had a level 1 and level 2 PICP, I believe was what it was called, which I completed both of them eventually. But it was the PICP 1 I think I went for. And then I don't think it was till a few months later that I actually got coached directly by Charles Poliquin doing his biosignature course. At that point in time, it was called biosignature. I think then it was bioprint, and then something else after that. I don't even remember what the names kept changing to. But anyway, so I just say at that point in time, I was really at a big kind of pivotal point in my career where I knew that I needed more education. I wanted to get better. And I just hadn't really, I hadn't done that much work on my own, to be honest, to look around, because obviously the internet existed back then. I just could have typed stuff in. But again, the internet's obviously not great. I mean, who knows what would have come up if I just said personal training, continuing education, probably just a crapshoot. So it was really, really important to me that I had someone that I respected, one of my mentors, say, hey, this guy's brilliant. One of his mentors, go do some of this stuff. And so a couple things that I want to talk about with that, like that's probably one of the biggest things that I would say right as soon as I went to do that. It was such a huge turning point in my career, because at that point I committed as a bare minimum I would travel for education at least once a year. And I want to say that was probably 2009 or 10. I think I took the biosignature in 2010. So I'm not sure if I did those the same year, but 2009 or 10, I committed to, I will do, travel for one educational thing, whether it's a certification, pretty much always a certification, occasionally seminars, stuff like that as well too. But I will do it every single year. And I think that was I know that was one of the most important things I did in my career, just to, again, fostering that growth mindset. And I think that's a huge thing. Anything in life, any profession, if you're not continually moving forward, you're not continually growing. And if you just don't, the first thing is not just actually putting in the work, because part of it is putting in the work. Again, I was working as a trainer. So anyone that's watching this as a trainer, there's not paid time off generally. It might be a little bit, even being manager of a club, there might have been a little bit of paid time off, but basically 80% of my income came from training clients. And so basically if I went out of town, I would lose the time that I went out of town that actually get money from clients, obviously get compensated for training clients. And at the same time, I had to pay for all of it. So I had to pay for travel. I had to pay for the certification, which wasn't cheap. I had to pay for hotels. So again, it was just clicking in my mind that I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this thing work. And then from there, obviously, it was a stretch to make it work. It was a lot of money. And again, it was time out of my job, again, if I was going to have more time off, I could go on vacation. I could do something else just more fun. So again, it was a really, really big thing for me to actually, again, make the mental switch, but then also commit and actually do the legwork. Again, from physically taking time out of my day and hours out of my, weeks or whatever, and also just putting my money where my mouth was. So, one, that was massive. And then two, I would say that's the things about starting to do continuing education. Again, if you're a trainer and you're not doing continuing education and specifically not going, and again, I'm not saying any specific course you have to go to, but if you're not traveling to do that kind of stuff, you're just eventually going to get stuck in your spot. You're going to get stuck around all the same people. A lot of people get that, they're the big fish in the small pond type thing. And again, you just got to switch in your brain that one, you can always get better. There's always someone you can learn something from. There's always better coaches at something. Again, I don't really think that this needs to be this coach is better than that coach. Everyone's better at something. And so it was also massive for me, one, to go and do all those things, but also to be around like-minded people. And so that was a big thing. Imagine if you travel somewhere where I've gone to courses that had 10 or 12 coaches. I've gone to courses that have 70 coaches. And all of them are traveling literally from all over the world. That was the cool part about Poliquin stuff. Trainers from all over the world, coaches from all over the world, working with all different clients, athletes, everything. And they're all there doing the same thing you're doing. They're taking time out of their day. They're spending a lot of money. And so it's just really good for, some of it's that networking thing, which obviously comes back around, but some of it's a positive, good thing. Every single time I would go to one of these things, I'd kind of obviously have to be huffing around as I was taking time out to go do this stuff. But it always ended up being so refreshing, honestly. Even though the courses, lots of times I'd train early before the courses. I'd go to the course all day. Running around to try and get food and all that kind of stuff. It was physically and mentally exhausting, but it was also very, very refreshing at the same time, just to get out of your bubble and get into something that, again, is just a positive, good thing, personally, professionally, in every way, shape, or form. So some of the main things, some of the main concepts, my voice just cracked. I'm going through puberty, sorry. But some of the main things that, again, I think about that I loved about Poliquin, that I learned from Poliquin, that I took away from him, is one, as a coach, your results and your expertise are just massive. I mean, results first and foremost. I mean, that's one of the biggest things that really drew me to Poliquin in the first place. Is again, no coach, obviously myself included, but no coach, no educational body, nothing is perfect. So you don't ever have to view things in that lens. As soon as you just get that out of your head, it's like, okay, well, there's going to be some amazing stuff. There's going to be some stuff that either I'm different, or there's going to be some stuff I don't, use. So again, it's not about going and learning from someone or going to a certain body and saying, this is it, this is the best. But it really is about going to people that produce massive results. And so that was one of the first things that appealed to me, is like, man, like the list of the guys that this person's working with, he's in the trenches, he's doing his stuff. If you're a coach, your results need to speak for you more than anything else. And so that was a big thing with him. That's obviously been a big thing in the industry everywhere I worked, especially with normal clients, but there's a lot of people out there calling themselves strength coaches or trainers or whatever their label are. And especially in the strength coach world, which I've never considered myself a strength coach, there's a lot of strength coaches that are not working with athletes. And so it's like, well, if you're not really working with athletes, you're not improving results. I don't really know if you can call yourself necessarily a strength coach. So one, I just related right away to his expertise. I related to the way that he communicated. So I always talk about that as a coach. The information in your brain is great, but how you communicate it is just as important, if not more important. It doesn't matter what's in your brain if you can't get it out right, if you can't get people to relate to it, if you can't get athletes or people to buy in. And so that was a thing that just kind of clicked with Poliquin as well, too, whether it's good or bad. Again, if you've had coaches growing up, depending on the sport you played, it really related to me, because the coaches that always pushed me the most were the ones that gave me shit, that were like borderline assholes. But in a way that, again, for me, I don't like, personally, everyone's different, I get it, but I don't like being cupcaked. I don't like being like, oh, everything, you're doing great, everything's fine, you're trying your hardest. I just never responded well from that. I responded well from coaches that called me on my crap, that basically, from giving me a hard time, let me know that I could do better. There's more in there or whatever. And so Poliquin, being a coach that he's been in gyms and training people his whole life, there's not a whole lot of PC talk or communication around that. It's basically right to the point. Here's what I've seen. Here's where you're at. And I really, really related to that with him, just the way that he taught and he communicated, where it was, again, he was kind of, in a nice way, a little bit of an asshole, but an asshole coach, like the kind that, again, that demanded more from you. And if you sucked at something, he would nicely let you know. I always share the very first time I went to Biosignature, and so kind of get into some of the actual physical transformation I did with him. He would basically, I didn't realize at the time, part of it was going through and doing all these sites. So part of the Biosignature was learning how to do all these skin fold, body fat sites very accurately. And I didn't know at the time, but if you had a embarrassing body part of some sort near that skin fold, he would call you up to the front of class to make fun of you while using you to demonstrate. And so I laughed at a couple people as he did that, and then he called me up at some point in time. And at that point in time, I had been doing the permabulk. So basically, I was doing what I thought you had to do to be a bodybuilder, which is just eat 600, 700 grams of carbs a day, no matter what, and just push the food and train hard and heavy and all that good stuff. And so I didn't know it till a time, because I could still see something that resembled an ab, but I was just under 16% body fat the first time I went. I literally think I was 15.9% body fat. And so anyway, he used me to show the suprailiac site, which is basically, it's the skin fold right above your iliac crest, right out the side of your pelvis. And so as he's talking, vividly, obviously etched in my brain to this day, he had me lean to the side. You push your fingers right into the, the side of the pelvis, run them right over the top of that iliac crest, the top of the pelvis. And then you have the person do it, lean over your fingers, and the fold will go right over your fingers. And as he was talking, he was saying exactly what I said. They lean over the fold, and he goes, or in this guy's case, the muffin top. And so again, I'm in a classroom with with basically 65, 70 of my peers, while he's got my muffin top, grabbing it and pitching it in front of everybody. And he said that obviously this guy hasn't met a carb that he never liked, which in all honesty, I thought was hilarious. I'm the type of person that likes that. And I honestly just didn't even think about it. I'm like, well, I'm bulking, it is what it is. And so anyway, I always share that because it's a funny / embarrassing / ingrained in my brain story. But so anyway, that's an example of him being kind of an asshole that worked for me. It appreciated. So like literally when I was at that course, we're talking through things, about things like insulin sensitivity, things that you can be concerned about, consuming a massive amount of carbs, but also just being in a surplus for a ridiculously long period of time. And really just had some light bulbs go on for me. I was like, oh, maybe I probably shouldn't be using this. Maybe I'm probably not using my nutrients as well as I could be, being in the surplus for probably going on 10 years at this point in time. And so again, kind of getting into some of the nuts and bolts of everything with the course is, he really, really opened my eyes to a whole lot of stuff. I shared this before in a video, and people felt some feels about it, but I'm just going to say it is what it is. So again, my stats kind of right when I went to that course the first time, I was 210, 15.9% body fat, and coming back pretty much almost 1 year later, maybe a little over a year later, I was 222 and about 11 point something, 11.9, 11.8% body fat. I had the exact same coach do my measurements, exact same calipers, exact same method. And again, last time I said that, again, people were like, that's impossible. You can't blah, blah, whatever. I'm like, well, I'm not selling anything. I'm telling you something that occurred basically a decade ago. And again, I'm speaking to a coach and a curriculum that you can't even take if you want anymore. So it is what it is. To give a little bit more context to that, like I said, I went basically while I was in the course and, after getting my actual diagnosis from the coach as fat and having a muffin top, I literally stopped eating carbs. So one, obviously, again, in my brain from what Poliquin really pushed at that point in time was if you're fat, don't eat carbs. But really it's like, well, if you're overweight, get in a deficit. So again, I went into a deficit by not eating carbs, but I also really cranked up my protein intake very high. So again, if my protein was probably under a gram per pound of body weight, and I cranked it up to about 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, I really think that big of a change, along with a whole lot of other things, can allow for really good recomp. So like I said, probably in a 6-week period of time, I probably dropped that, whatever that is, 3-4% body fat, which isn't too insane to do, especially with that big of a caloric drop. But I also cranked up my protein very high while still training hard. So again, I think I was really in a good place to actually legitimately recomp, at least for that shortish period of time. And then basically the entire rest of the year, I clean bulked basically. So, I think I got down to a little bit over 200 pounds. And then over the course of about a year, I put on about 15 pounds of lean tissue, which I know is a lot. But again, that's one of two biggest, year transformations I had. One of my first ones was when I was in college, and that was a huge change for how much food I was eating and how much I was sleeping. And that time I probably put on close to 20 pounds of lean tissue in a year. And then my second, again, newbie gains just happened to come years after that, like I said, 2010, 11. And so now I kind of want to discuss some of the big things that I took away from him. And so again, just to give you an idea of the context of how could I make that big of a change in a shorter period of time, it's also a matter how bad off I was prior to that and how many things I literally changed, like 10 things that were positive changes in a very, very short period of time, obviously had a huge impact on my physique. So one, the context is I was probably working, I'd say 70 to 80 hours a week at that point in time. So again, I had a full clientele, was managing a club. So I was working a lot. I was sleeping very little, probably less than 6 hours a night. I don't know how good the quality of my sleep was. I was probably consuming near 1 gram, so 1,000 milligrams of caffeine per day. So I would literally take some caffeine in the morning, maybe some coffee, maybe some pre-workout. I'd take a pre-workout halfway through the day. Then when I actually had to train, I'd take 2 more scoops of a pre-workout. I'd have to double down on it. And maybe an energy drink thrown in there as well too. So basically I was probably just pushing my body to the brink of self-destructing on me. Just because of how much I was working. I was that stereotypical stim junkie. I was not prioritizing sleep in any capacity. I was still trying to train as hard as humanly possible. And it really just had my body in a horrible spot to recover. So Poliquin was really one of the first people to, again, not that I'm pretending this is information he completely made up himself, but one of the first people that really made me aware of how bad I was doing some of that stuff. And again, how much I had, how much room I could have that I could improve. And so that was one of the first huge things is it took me a little while where I slowly tapered down my caffeine use. But within a couple months, I was going from, again, consuming, different forms of caffeine 3 or 4 times a day to just taking caffeine once pre-workout. And I still stick with that now 90% of the time. Every once in a while, I might have a little coffee in the morning and then maybe a little bit pre-workout as well too. But for the most part, I'm having stimulants just once a day. And I'm having a time when, your adrenals and your cortisol should be kicking up. Obviously before you train, people talk about, obviously, you don't want to be catabolic and all this. That you're supposed to be catabolic when you train. Your cortisol should kick up when you train. Otherwise, if it didn't, you wouldn't have any energy and you wouldn't be able to train hard. So again, supporting that by taking stimulants, taking caffeine only times when you're probably supposed to be in that, I think was a really good thing. Just some basic, easy stuff anyone can do to support like a good cortisol pattern, good cortisol curve. And then he had so much stuff that I hadn't thought about before. So from a pre-workout standpoint, he's the person that converted me from taking stuff that just made me feel like I was getting tasered, where I just literally feel like I was getting zapped or electrocuted and would have like a seizure while doing it, to actually focusing on things that would actually help with focus and drive while I was training. So he's one of the first people to really introduce me to GPC, to lion's mane, to using theanine at various points in time. And so again, he was the first person to give me a whole host of these basically nootropic type things that things could actually boost dopamine and acetylcholine, actually give me an idea of what we want happening with our neurotransmitters while we're training, as opposed to I just want as much caffeine as possible and I want to be borderline shaking and sweating and feeling uncomfortable while I'm training. And so again, if any of you guys have followed my content where I talk about what I do pre, intra, post, I mean, some of it's changed a teeny bit, but at least 80% of that stuff came from Poliquin 10 years ago. And you'll see, honestly, a lot of stuff that I'm using now was stuff that he was pushing 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of the supplement industry is finally catching up. I feel like there's not as much push for people wanting to get actually, hit with a taser before they train, and people actually wanting to be in a good mood, be focused, and be driven. And I think that leads to better performance in the gym as opposed to just, again, shaking the whole time while you're training. Intra-workout was something I was never really doing at that point in time. So he was one of the first person that's basically, if you've earned some carbs, intra-workout using some sort of, he's very heavy at one point in time on just branch chains, which again, I don't think is a bad energy source, but he was the first one that led me first to branch chains and then ultimately into essential amino acids when training. So he's really one of the first people that got me doing anything intra-workout. And post-workout, he was one of the first people that actually focused on things aside from just macronutrients. So taking things that can help you calm. And again, talking about where you want your adrenals and your cortisol cranked up and when you want your body to start calming. And it's really that your body getting calm, I think, is the first step of kind of that anabolic switch to actually recovery, as opposed to just eating a ton of macronutrients. He's also very big on, obviously, post-training is a great time for a larger amount of carbs just because you've trained, your insulin sensitivity is going to be pretty good. But also just really getting your body prepared to be in a place where it actually wants to recover and grow. And so again, still to this day, things that I take post-training came from him, from again, theanine, taurine, various forms of magnesium. Again, those are things that for a decade plus I've been taking entirely basically from his recommendation. So a couple other little things in there as well too. And again, just the overall mindset I want to touch on before I go through one or two different specifics of things that I really took away from him. Another thing that I really learned, so this was one of the first courses that I traveled to, one of the first times I was listening to someone like him talk. If you ever heard Poliquin talk, if you were lucky enough to, he could lecture for an hour straight. He could cite 25 studies while doing so, name the people involved in studies, interpret the study. So he had this crazy just robot brain. And then on top of that, he had all this experience and application and results produced. So honestly, the first time I went in, the very first day, I think I came out of it kind of depressed. I was like, oh, like that's a real coach. And like, I'll never be a real coach. I can't remember all that stuff. I'm not going to remember all those studies. And I remember talking to someone and just saying, yeah, they need a little disclaimer when you come to this course. Because some people come out of the course literally feeling like that, like, oh, I'm an idiot. And just saying that, if you go through a course, any course, one, realize, the same when people hear me talk or learn from me sometimes, like, oh, he's really smart. It's like, well, I only talk about one thing all day. So hopefully I know the subject pretty well. So one is, whenever you're learning from someone, don't always feel like you need to emulate that person. I mean, it sounds cliche. This kind of ties in with what your mom said, you're your own special, unique snowflake, whatever. But you really, obviously, whatever makes you a good coach can be individual. You don't have to emulate any other coach. And reality is you shouldn't. The things that you like, the things that you're passionate about will ultimately the things that you're the most educated on and be able to speak to the best. And again, Poliquin's apart from everything else that he did, just had that memory where he just knew every single study, everything involved. He was very, very big into nutrition, supplementation, functional medicine. And a lot of that stuff I found interesting to make myself better, but it's not a subject matter that I was passionate about. So I realized going through all this stuff, that was the good and the bad about Poliquin stuff, is he basically gave you the very tip of an iceberg of lots of complex subjects. So again, when I talk about functional medicine can have a good or bad name depending on the context you do it. My view of functional medicine is I always like to work with medical doctors. So again, I have a medical doctor, as MD, went to a big school, was in the Air Force. So again, a lot of good Western medicine things. I like a lot of modern medicine things, but just having a little bit more of, looking for the underlying cause of some things and not just throwing drugs at symptoms. And so again, there's problems with functional medicine when people go too far that direction, but I also think there's problems. And again, a silly example I always give is, someone could have heartburn and they could go to a doctor and they say, oh, here's these 10 different prescription medications you could take for heartburn. Or they could go to a doctor and they could actually have a conversation. This is so strange to me that some doctors wouldn't have a conversation about what the person's eating or potentially order them some sort of actual blood work or test to determine, is there something going on in their gut? And so again, that's a very, very simple, easy example of saying, okay, well, let's just throw some prescription drugs at the symptom, or let's maybe see if there's a very, very easy fix where someone could be taking out one food that's a trigger for them or adding in one supplement, whether it's a specific probiotic or something else to promote gut health. And so anyway, I say all that because I loved everything that Poliquin introduced me to the realm of functional medicine. And then I kind of had to do the thing that everyone should do. I always say the Bruce Lee thing, where you absorb what's useful and you just reject or leave the rest. And so again, the whole thing was great because all these were very complicated. I was very interested in the subject, but at the same time, I knew for how complicated it is to how much you have to actually know about, people's, again, whether we're looking at digestion or sleep patterns or the complexity of actually taking people's care of people's health. That's a lot of trainers would go through the course and start doing things outside of their scope of practice and realize I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a medical doctor. But it was really, really good for me to kind of say, okay, well, these things are important. And it helped me build my network. And so that's a lot of things as you go through certifications. I say that's one of the most important things. One, go through and don't feel the need to emulate whoever you're learning from. Two, always go in with, that Bruce Lee mindset. Not everything that you're going to hear is something that either one is completely right. Sometimes there's things that every coach and every course has its Kool-Aid that's just stuff that's like, okay, well, here's what we do in this course or this thing. But again, some of it's just either, again, it's not entirely right, you don't completely understand it, or it's out of context for your population. And so again, and then also some things you're going to get introduced to stuff that will help you figure out what do you want to focus on and not focus on. And again, so that was a big thing with the course where it really helped me build my network. There were so many things that Poliquin seemed so well educated on. And I was like, well, I'm not going to take the time and effort to get the education needed to have this qualification or to actually do this with people's diets or order this type of blood work or whatever it is. I'm going to get people within my network that can do those things. And then I've had other courses that have done the same thing, whether it's with corrective work, where realizing like, okay, I really can't diagnose anything. I don't want to put in the time and effort to be qualified to diagnose things. And really the treatment of injuries is not an easy thing to do as well too. So all of these courses and things, starting with Poliquin stuff, helped me see all this great stuff that was out there, helped me figure out what did I want to focus on more, but also helped me build my network for the things that I don't want to have as my area of expertise. So some just general things I always say, my dumb version of, again, some very, very complicated subjects, got me a little bit of a different lens on certain things, a little bit of a different lens on food, on supplements. And I just think it's, again, this is stuff that's such a touchy area, but I'll just say from my personal, how I like to do my food, how I like to do my supplements, just realizing that a lot of things, as far as our diet and exposure, I feel comfortable thinking this statement is accurate, where if we look at some time frame ago, let's say 200 years ago, let's say 500 years ago, I think that we ate certain foods that contain certain micronutrients. I think it's pretty safe to say that we don't have all those same things in our food that we used to. At the same time, maybe 500 years ago, we weren't exposed to all the same things we're exposed to now, just in the environment, cars driving down the street, chemicals that run off into our water, all sorts of stuff. So all that being said, now the way to go about all that, it gets tricky with supplementation. But again, I think there's some things that, again, we used to eat that we don't. I think that's a great category for things that we want to supplement with. And then there's some things that we're exposed to that we used to not be. So that's another need for supplements is going to help us detox certain things, or we're going to try and eat certain foods or use certain products to try and avoid those types of things. And again, that's as detailed as I'm going to get into that because, again, supplements are tricky. I always think with anyone doing supplements, again, you should have a doctor. You should look at your blood work. Even something that could be the best thing ever, not even the best thing ever, but there's so much research that shows fish oil is great. That being said, for someone, the wrong kind, the wrong amount for too long could cause health problems. So even something that's on paper, almost everyone says, this is great, you should supplement with this, it could still be wrong for someone, at least for some amount, for some time, for some dose. And so the same thing, even with foods and stuff, it's like, oh, well, I eat certain types of foods where sometimes I do certain things organic. I use products that exclude certain things. And again, Poliquin was really one of the first people to introduce me to EWG, which I think, again, nothing's perfect, but is a good site for environmentalworkinggroup.org, which is a good site for looking at all the different things and chemicals and stuff that are in products that you may use, like personal hygiene stuff, soap and cleaning products, things like that. And again, what you do with that information, I'm not saying every chemical is bad. I'm not saying things that are in our food are whatever. I'm not saying eating organic is perfect or it's better than anything else. But again, Poliquin was one of the first people to just present me with a lot of information that maybe we should be kind of aware of this stuff. And you'll even see if you pay attention now, there's more and more even mainstream media picking up on stuff as far as, what's happening with the average person's hormones, what's happening with the average male testosterone levels, estrogen levels, what are these things called xenoestrogens? There's things that maybe mimic estrogens and things that we consume in our environment. And so again, all of that gets tricky. The reason, if you've heard me talk before, why I hate supplementation, why I hate nutrition is people want to turn it into a religion. But I do think it's good to at least have some sort of education on that kind of stuff, and then make personal decisions depending on where you're at, your health, your goals, your finances, as far as what makes the most sense, without, again, turning things into black and white, good or bad, evil, and like I said, some sort of cult thing or something from there. Aside from that, again, so that was really, really some of the biggest stuff I learned from Poliquin. It's got me thinking about recovery, got me thinking about gut health, got me thinking about things that I was consuming or not consuming, and again, really started to create a framework for how I make decisions involving recovery, what I'm doing pre, intra, post training, what I'm doing to help my body start to sleep and things like that. And again, really was just kind of the tip of the iceberg for a lot of those topics. I always talk a little bit about training as well too. Probably one of the cool things I got from Poliquin from training, there's a lot of really good information in there. But one of it was the first time I really had gotten back to doing some 2-a-days at some point in time. That was one of the other things that helped my body change probably the fastest over the course of that year, is once I actually got my sleep to the point where I was getting 8 hours of sleep tonight, got my food a little bit more on point. There were phases of time when I would actually do 2-a-days, again, pushed by him. He was one of the people that was big on kind of more functional hypertrophy or strength type training in a morning session, and then more standard hypertrophy stuff in the evening. And so again, just some stuff that he got me doing for periods of time. That was probably one of the fastest times that I grew, and also the fastest my body disassembled when I kind of pushed it for too long at various points in time. So that's basically it. Those are the big things that I wanted to cover. And again, if there's one thing that I would really sum up from Poliquin more than anything else, and if I look through all the courses that I took, I took, again, courses from him, again, for training, courses that were kind of like corrective modalities, again, with things more nutritional focused. I probably in total maybe took somewhere between 8 and 10 courses from him at various points in time. Some of them were 2 or 3 days. Some of them were 5 days long. When I first did BioStange, I think it was 5 days long. And I'm still in touch with some of the coaches that I met at that point in time. But the biggest single impact is he was the first person that I ever paid a lot of money to travel to for a certification. The first person that really sparked me, okay, I'm going to do this continuing education every single year for as long as I continue coaching, which I'm doing right now. And then hopefully, again, for all those little details, kind of open up a whole other bunch of stuff that, again, just had a positive impact on my mindset. And without a doubt, I don't know what this means. I don't know exactly where I'd be sitting today, exactly where my mindset would be, but it certainly wouldn't be the same, and I certainly wouldn't be in the exact same spot. So again, it's of all the people that have had a massive impact on my career. If you haven't watched the previous video, I'll link it up here. I did one with Tom Purvis, who's probably had the single biggest impact on my career from an education standpoint. But again, not that placing matters, but Poliquin's probably right there for number 2, I would say. And so anyway, if you guys haven't already, take a look around. He's got so much information out there and so much great information. Again, just Google, you'll find tons of good YouTube information. So there's still a ton of his great content out there. And like I said, some of it, even if you find videos and stuff from 10 years ago plus, some of it will still be relevant. You'll see a lot of people doing things today. A lot of people are doing things today that came from Poliquin they don't even know came from Poliquin, which is fine. Obviously, the industry is huge. There's no way for everyone to know where every little thing came from. But again, just wanted to do the video to hopefully you guys pick up some little tidbits here and there, some things, again, and more than anything else to help you guys, have that growth mindset, how to look at education, how to look at educators, how to look at courses, how to navigate those things. And hopefully overall just, help you guys be better with your own training or better with your, your coaching or your clientele. And until the next one, this is everything I learned from Charles Poliquin.